In 1492, Columbus makes his way from Spain, Portugal, and he hits the West Indies. He meets up with the natives there, and he finds himself amidst great hospitality. He turns around, he makes his way back, he has a meeting with the Pope. The Pope at that time writes up a papal bull. They're just hot on the heels of the Crusades, where they're going out conquering in the name of Christ. They're having these military campaigns, and he writes the papal bull that establishes what's called the Doctrine of Discovery, in which any lands that are discovered by European discoverers that go in the name of the church are able to claim that land as the church's land, and it is a discovery for the church, and those lands can be depopulated and can be brought under dominion and subjugation. And that is the beginning of the history of the Americas, and particularly the United States. So immediately the Catholic Church starts sending out these missionaries. And these missionaries were establishing these missions all throughout the United States as a stake of dominion. And so the roads that they would call there is called the road, the Via Dolorosa, that this was going to be, a hard road, but it was going to be established for Christ. And so that's why you'll see, like in California, you will see what's called the King's Highway, or the El Camino, the way. And so this is where they would set up these places as fortresses for this kind of embattled concept of the city of God, Augustine's concept of the city of God and the conquest that is to be in this new land, this new discovered land. And so let's check out and let's kind of see what some of these missionary cathedrals look like. An important thing to understand in Christendom, in the world of Christianity, is the doctrine of dominion theology that we have touched on in so many ways. This is the concept that's virtually made up the concept of the Catholic Church, that the church is supposed to have dominion over the entire world. It is to subjugate the world to Christ, and if it's used through these more Old Testament concepts of conquering the Canaanites, if it's through military conquest or if it's through spies and intrigue. This is all a very kind of a crypto-Jewish Old Testament theology that does believe that, that through warfare or through whatever means it is politically, that there is an Israel on earth that is the church, but in the style of an Old Testament conquest mentality. And that is dominion theology in essence, and that really makes up the essence of Catholicism. Now, Protestantism, on the other hand, looks at the New Testament of the picture in which Abraham did not obtain to that land. For what reason? Because that land would be obtained upon the return of Christ, and when Christ gives his inhabitants through resurrection, or through judging the earth and creating a new heavens, a new earth, and a new creation week. So that is a key difference. Catholicism is this entire pursuit of a world conquest in this age, not by conquering the world by turning people to Christ through the gospel, and Christ is mediating his high priesthood up in heaven, but they've brought the priesthood here down on earth, and they are mediating here on earth as if this is a conquest done through the church and through people and through the hierarchical system of the church ecclesiastical. And so when they think of the term the church militant, is different than how a Protestant would think of that. The church militant to the Catholic would literally be militant, military. The Jesuit order, it's an army. You could kill. You can employ armies. You could take over governments. You could subjugate princes and kings. And it's very important to really understand that dominion theology is a radical change from what the gospel intent is. Dominion theology teaches that you have to conquer this world, and that's why you get the picture of things like the Inquisition, or you get the Crusades, or whatever has happened that has brought great reproach upon the name of Christ, that has happened through, quote, Christianity. And yet this is all really coming from the concept of this dominion theology paradigm that the church has taken up. The problem is, and what we're going to touch upon, is how Protestantism had subscribed to that mentality. And how so? Well, particularly and especially Revelation 13 brings out the lamb-like beast is in the image of that amalgamated beast of Revelation 13 and becomes its likeness. Now that amalgamated beast has clearly been identified in prophecy as the Roman Catholic system, made up of all the different systems of religion, as kind of Christianized it, so to speak.
Revelation 13. And I saw a beast rising out of the sea, with 10 horns and 7 heads, with 10 diadems on its horns, and blasphemous names on its heads. And the beast that I saw was like a leopard, its feet were like a bear's, and its mouth was like a lion's mouth. And to it the dragon gave his power, and his throne, and great authority. One of its heads seemed to have a mortal wound, but its mortal wound was healed. Then I saw another beast rising out of the earth. It had 2 horns like a lamb, and it spoke like a dragon. It exercises all the authority of the first beast in its presence, and makes the earth and its inhabitants worship the first beast whose mortal wound was healed.
In the 13th chapter of Revelation, there are 2 global powers that are identified as establishing a false system of worship at the end of time. One is an ecclesiastical power, swaying the world through its religious authority. The other is a secular power, the most influential nation in all the world. Through the unification of the ecclesiastical and civil powers, a counterfeit system is derived in which religious liberties are removed, and the freedom to worship God according to one's own conscience will be supplanted by the conscience of a church-state government. Variation from the established authority will be punished as heresy or treason. As far-fetched as all this may seem from America's future, this is not the first time the secular and religious powers have united into a single tyrannical government. For roughly 1260 years, Justinian's Code reigned from approximately 538 AD until 1798. Justinian's Code was the civil law of Europe, which stated that the Roman Catholic faith was the only authorized religion, and that the Roman Catholic pontiff was the supreme power of God on earth. Any persons who denied the Pope's supremacy or rejected the Catholic faith were subject to civil punishments. Justinian's Code formed the basis of religious intolerance for nearly 13 centuries.
We desire that all people subject to our benign empire shall live under the same religion that the divine Peter, the apostle, gave to the Romans. We order all those who follow this law to assume the name of Catholic Christians, and considering others as demented and insane, we order that they shall bear the infamy of heresy. Let no place be afforded to heretics for the conduct of their ceremonies, and let no occasion be offered for them to display the insanity of their obstinate minds. Let all bodies of heretics be prevented from holding unlawful assemblies.
The freedom for lay people to assemble in their own churches and worship God according to their own conscience was considered, quote, unlawful assemblies. The freedom to even speak about religious matters in public would be visited by the severest punishment. The Pope was considered the head of all the churches. Those who were labeled as heretics were to be deprived of their right to property and inheritance. The right to buy or sell was taken away, and the heretic's crimes were considered to be treason, punishable, quote, beyond death.
No one, whether he belongs to the clergy, the army, or to any other condition of men, shall, with a view to causing a tumult and giving occasion to treachery, attempt to discuss the Christian religion publicly in the presence of an assembled and listening crowd. We desire, in the first place, that their offense should be classed as a public crime, because whatever is committed against the divine religion is productive of injury to all persons. We punish them by the confiscation of all their property, and we wish them to be excluded from obtaining any gift or inheritance of any description whatsoever. In addition to this, we deprive anyone found guilty of these heresies of the power of giving, purchasing, selling, and, finally, of making any contracts. An investigation of this kind shall also extend beyond death, for, as it is permitted to denounce the memory of the deceased in case of treason, it is not unreasonable that a heretic should undergo the same sentence.
A government that takes away the right to buy or sell as a civil punishment for religious crimes is described in Revelation 13 as a power that will again rise to supremacy at the end of time. The unification of church and state may not be so distant of a reality as it may seem. The legal precedence to establish laws like Justinian's Code in America has already been established through a series of papal bulls known as the Doctrine of Discovery. These bulls make up the body and basis of the laws which establish the right to land ownership in America. In 1095, Pope Urban II passed the first international law in his papal bull entitled Terra Nullius, or Empty Land. This bull gave kings and princes of Europe the right to, quote, discover and possess non-Catholic land in various regions of the world on the basis that the land was considered legally empty because it was not under Catholic rule. In 1452, the papacy issued another bull called Dum Diversas, which gave the Spanish monarchy the right to invade other lands and place all non-Catholics into perpetual servitude.
We grant to you full and free power through the apostolic authority by this edict to invade, conquer, fight, subjugate the Saracens and pagans and other infidels and other enemies of Christ, and wherever established their kingdoms, duchies, royal palaces, principalities, and other dominions, lands, places, estates, camps, and any other possessions, mobile and immobile goods found in all these places and held in whatever name, and to lead their persons in perpetual servitude.
The bull that legitimized Christopher Columbus's discovery of America was issued by Pope Alexander VI, called Inter Caetera, or among other works, and was issued in 1493 as a part of the Bulls of Donation, granting the Spanish monarchy the legal title to the land that Columbus had discovered, and issued a title granting rights to any future lands that might be discovered in non-Christian parts of the world.
As becomes Catholic kings and princes, you have purposed with the favor of divine clemency to bring under your sway the said mainlands and islands, with their residents and inhabitants, and to bring them to the Catholic faith. And we make, appoint, and depute you, and your said heirs and successors lords of them, with full and free power, authority, and jurisdiction of every kind.
America's very autonomy as a nation and legitimacy of its government has the Papal Bull of 1493 at its roots. Power to discover and claim possession of land that was not already under the rule of a Christian sovereign was a precedence first established by the Catholic Church, and is the father of how America legitimizes its claim to possess land over other people groups like the Native Americans today.
So in really keying in on Revelation 13 and looking at the amalgamated beast, and what is that? That's the first beast that is mentioned in Revelation 13. And that is the beast that has the body of a leopard, it has the mouth of a lion, it has the claws of a bear, and then it has 7 heads and 10 horns, and it's clearly been identified in prophecy as the Roman Catholic system. It's the papal system that truly had adopted all the qualities of Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, Rome, all the persecuting powers, the stealthful body of the leopard, and its ability to camouflage and to hide, the great jaws in the persecuting power of the bite of the lion. It has the claws of a bear. If you've ever seen the claws of a grizzly, then it has the 7 heads and the 10 horns, and that's all this amalgamated system. And that's why when you look at the Roman Church and even look at all the symbols, it's all religions all melded together. That's why the Catholic system needed Neoplatonism, the ability to use what's called the law of Hermes, the Hermetic kind of doctrine of looking at all religions and what is the theme of all religions that's played out in maybe the different characteristics of Buddhism or in Hinduism or in Shintoism or in whatever idea that it is. It could be any pagan idea, but it's all culminated or all boiled down into how does this all sync up and link up, and it's really saying all the same thing. Well, that's Neoplatonism, and that is why the system is identified as a harlot, as something that takes in all the religions and amalgamates it and turns it into this system, this dominion theology world religion system called Catholic. Now that's the first beast. Now the second beast, which is a lamb-like beast that rises up from the land, has been clearly identified around the time in which the Catholic beast, that system, it was given its power in 538 when the Ostrogoths were finally defeated by the Roman armies through the Roman Catholic system. It was able to negotiate and able to dismantle a lot of the conflict that was there, and there were treaties involved, and that gave rise to the Roman Catholic system in 538. Now, in the book Revelation, it says that for 1260 day/prophetic years, that this power will rule, and it did rule all throughout Europe, and eventually, made its way into the Americas. But it received a deadly wound in 1260 years later from 538, which is 1798, in which you had Berthier, the general to Napoleon, give that deadly wound. Now it talks about around that time when that wound is healing, that there is a power that is rising up from a, quote, uninhabited land, in which we've discussed. And that power is a lamb-like beast or a Christ-like beast, a Christian-like nation. It's an image of that, but it's not the reality of a Christian nation. And it grows up into this great persecuting power that starts to speak as a dragon.
In the book Secret Destiny of America, Manly P. Hall, a well-known occultist, describes the founding fathers of America as Freemasons, merely clothing their occult ideas with Christian rhetoric, much like today. He says the pagan intellectuals reclothed their original ideas in a garment of Christian phraseology. In this way, America is a lamb-like beast, claiming to be founded upon the principles of Christ, but merely using Christian language as a cloak for ulterior agendas.
Now, what's fascinating to understand about that power is when you look in the Old Testament under that word for a lamb-like beast, it's the word re'em, R-E'-E-M, and that is the picture of the buffalo. Now, anytime that beast is brought up in the Old Testament, it starts off as a power that liberates God's people. It's first brought up as God identifying himself, and he liberated his people from Egypt. And then from Egypt, Pharaoh couldn't hold them down. It was an animal that can't be tamed. And then many times it's showing that this is a liberating animal, which is exactly what the United States is, and it came up right around the whole late 1700s. But later on, it goes from being an untamed animal in which you cannot put a harness upon, you can't control, to a lawless beast, and gives its power over to the papal power, is what it says in Revelation 13. It hands its power over and reinvigorates the papal system. Now that power started to arise in the late 1700s, and it arose from a designated unpeopled lands in the book of Revelation, even though it was populated. But remember this doctrine of discovery that would not validate the existence of the natives that were here, and wiped them out through disease and conquest and military actions or through enslavement, and they ended up dying in so many terrible ways, but they weren't considered a people.
In Revelation, the lamb-like beast is seen coming out of the earth. The first beast is seen coming out of the sea. And in biblical symbolism, the sea represented peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues. Therefore, the first beast represents a system coming out of Europe, since Rome was the center of the world. Thus, out of this sea, Catholicism was born. Yet the lamb-like beast is seen coming out of the earth, which represents a land that was legally titled as empty, even though it was inhabited by millions of people. The Catholic Church saw America as a type of Canaan land to be conquered, dispossessing the original inhabitants. Because the occupiers were not Christian, the Catholic Church believed it was their divine inheritance to possess, conquer, and subjugate America, just like Israel dispossessed the inhabitants of Canaan. Pedro de Santander, an official of the Catholic Church, makes this very parallel.
This is the land of promise, possessed by idolaters, the Amorite, Amalekite, Moabite, Canaanite. This is the land promised by the Eternal Father to the faithful, since we are commanded by God in the Holy Scriptures to take it from them, being idolaters, and by reason of their idolatry and sin, to put them all to the king, leaving no living thing save maidens and children. Their cities robbed and sacked, their walls and houses leveled to the earth.
That's the key to understand that Revelation 13 is talking about the Roman Catholic dominion theology system and America, and adopting that dominion theology system into this thing called Christian democracy that is trying to spread throughout this world. Those two powers join together to create this circumstance of end-time events in which the whole world is churned up into this great place in which all the winds are unloosed, and the great warfares of humanity and the great powers come together to create this ultimate dominion, which is the dominion in which Rome and the United States share, sitting at the top of the throne, ruling this world. That's where we are today.
Sitting in between Virginia and Maryland, names that allude to the Virgin Mary. America's capital, Washington, D.C., was first called Rome, and was owned by a man named Francis Pope. Also sitting upon 7 hills, the New Rome shares striking architectural similarities to the Old Rome. The former power whose deadly wound was healed is identified in the Bible, as well as by many biblical scholars, as the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church was wounded in 1798 when General Berthier, in service to the French army and under the direction of Napoleon, captured the Pope and ended Justinian's code of religious intolerance, papal supremacy, and religious persecution, and replaced it with a Napoleonic code which granted religious freedom, among other liberties. However, this deadly wound was healed at the Lateran Concordat of 1929, in which Italy restored the Pope's autonomy and gave Vatican City back into his possession. It established Vatican City as its own sovereign nation. In Revelation 13, the latter beast, which emerges at the end of time, is said to exercise all the authority of the first beast. This implies that there will be a resurgence of laws that imitate Justinian's code and enact the same religious intolerance that was established during the Dark Ages. The unification of church and state and the pursuit of a terrestrial dominion is an ideology that is gaining momentum with Protestants. At the end of time, the biggest supporters of a church-state government will be American Protestants. In their zeal for holiness, they will unfortunately erect an image to the beast, in imitation of the Catholic system, using governmental powers to enforce religious hegemony.
So what we're going to look at is, how did the lamb-like beast in Revelation 13 decide to adopt the same philosophy, the same ideology, the same view of theology, of dominion theology, as the Roman Catholic system did? Protestantism obviously looked at the scripture as a picture of Christ mediating as a high priest in heaven, and the conquered lands is something that's conquered by Christ in the New Jerusalem in heaven. And it's when Christ's return that we're going to see him make a new heaven and new earth, and he's going to populate the new heaven and new earth with, of course, resurrected people with new bodies. Well, this dominion theology getting a hold of Protestantism is actually in history relatively a new concept. It has now shifted into a Roman Catholic dominion theology concept, and it's being played out in the history of America. And so what we're going to look at is what's called the Doctrine of Discovery, built upon the papal bull that said any place you guys discover is an object of conquest and dominion as long as it is for the church. And what we're going to look at is, how did America become the object of conquest for Rome, for papal Rome, and how, ironically, Protestantism has played into that to the point that the papal Roman Catholic system and its entire ideology that's being played out in this world today is in complete harmony and symbiotic to the role and the self-identity of the United States and its role in dominion theology throughout this world. Well, what the key to looking at this, and what we're going to look into, is the Doctrine of Discovery that displaced all the Native Americans and deemed the United States as a, quote, Christian dominion for the Roman system. And we're going to look at that very, very important connecting piece of Revelation chapter 13.
Whenever the Spanish government set out and colonized, they brought with them the missionaries. And in those days, missionary activity was deemed as part of the divine right of kings. It was deemed what we're supposed to be doing, spread the faith, that whole evangelistic thing. And so they always brought the priests with them. The priests actually served a pretty good function in the sense that you can say, too bad for the poor Indians, but the fact of the matter is, we were going to come. We, European people. We came to the east, and there was never going to be a choice where the Indians could say, look, oh, you guys stay out and let us stay out here in the woods.
It's an inevitable kind of thing.
Right? It was inevitable.
Right.
Okay?
Now, one of the features of the Doctrine of Discovery is the fact that when they came upon lands and it was inhabited by natives, they weren't actually considered people. Why is that? Well, they weren't Christians, and they weren't designated as written in the books of heaven and the registries of heaven. Just as the black slaves were only 3/5 considered peoples. They weren't considered peoples because they weren't Christians, and they weren't using the land to serve the mother church. So the Doctrine of Discovery never even saw the natives as actually peoples to be recognized, because the land was designated as land to have dominion over for the purpose of the mother church.
The papal bulls of donation have been cited in various Supreme Court rulings to establish the legitimacy for land ownership in America. Who has the legal title to American soil? The United States government or Native Americans?
So let's talk about how the Doctrine of Discovery in that 1493 papal bull started to play itself out in the United States. And it really came from the pushing of the natives across to the west, pushing them west and displacing them and taking people like the Cherokee, the Choctaw, the various Indian groups, and moving them west of the Mississippi. And the very precedent for that displacement, was in fact that papal bull of 1493, when natives would go to court and they would say, hey, listen, these lands were promised to us. We made treaties with you. Why are you breaking these treaties? The precedent was always, at least as far as legally and in the courts, they'd always go back to that 1493 bull saying that these are Christian lands and you are heathen unbelievers, and therefore you don't have a right to those lands. And one of the most fascinating parts of that story really played itself out in 1823 of Johnson versus McIntosh. And what it is that Johnson had bought lands from the Native Americans, and now somebody else had bought those lands later on from the United States government named McIntosh. Now, when those lands were in dispute, the judge, and his name is Judge Marshall, had ruled for McIntosh because he, at that point, cited the doctrine of discovery in that papal bull of 1493, saying that this is a Christian land, a Christian nation, and the United States was built upon the concept of the Roman Catholic Church going on its ventures of discovery to obtain dominion of unconverted peoples. And so what happened was that showed you the precedence that for all land disputes, the bottom line is in the United States and throughout the Americas, as you'll come to find out, is that that papal bull is the very foundation of all law of possession of land in the United States.
In the Johnson v. McIntosh case, the papal bull was cited by Chief Justice Marshall, who was speaking on behalf of a unanimous court. He stated 3 principles that legitimized a nation's right to seize and own land. The papal bull of 1493, in addition to the authority of the European crown, along with the fact that the lands discovered were occupied by non-Christians. All this, he stated, gave Europe the legitimate right to own the land it seized by force. In the Johnson v. McIntosh ruling, Chief Justice Marshall stated,
on the discovery of this immense continent, the great nations of Europe were eager to appropriate to themselves so much of it as they could respectively acquire. Its vast extent offered an ample field to the ambition and enterprise of all, and the character and religion of its inhabitants afforded an apology for considering them as a people over whom the superior genius of Europe might claim an ascendancy. The potentates of the Old World found no difficulty in convincing themselves that they made ample compensation to the inhabitants of the New by bestowing on them civilization and Christianity in exchange for unlimited independence. The history of America from its discovery to the present day proves, we think, the universal recognition of these principles. Spain did not rest her title solely on the grant of the Pope. The right of discovery given by this commission is confined to countries then unknown to all Christian people, thus asserting a right to take possession notwithstanding the occupancy of the natives who were heathens. The right derived from discovery and conquest can rest on no other basis, and all existing titles depend on the fundamental title of the crown by discovery.
Joseph Story, a contemporary of Justice Marshall, and author of the Commentaries on the Constitution, summarized Justice Marshall's ruling by saying,
the Indians were a savage race, sunk in the depths of ignorance and heathenism. They were bound to yield to the superior genius of Europe, and in exchanging their wild and debasing habits for civilization and Christianity, they were deemed to gain more than an equivalent for every sacrifice and suffering. The papal authority, too, was brought in aid of these great designs, and for the purpose of overthrowing heathenism and propagating the Catholic religion. Alexander VI, by a bull issued in 1493, granted to the crown of Castile the whole of the immense territory then discovered, or to be discovered.
What we're going to do is we need to talk about the phenomenon of America, an American prophecy, but we have to look at America also as the phenomenon unto itself, and we got to make sense of it. Why is it that America can pretty much do what it wants in this world, and it's okay? It's okay in the minds of Americans. There's a rationale, there's a justification for it. Why this radical, what's called jingoism, patriotism? No matter what America does, the purpose of America is great and right and moralistic. Where does the moral authority come from in that way that even things that in our sense of kind of cognitive dissonance, we look at it and we go, we know that's not right, but that's okay because we're doing it. Where does that come from? That's what's so important to really understand. How does this Protestant phenomenon play into the political system of the United States? What do I mean? Because American charismatic Pentecostal Protestantism, in which the term, which is very fascinating, the New World Order, coming from this new world, and there was a model that the United States was supposed to play in the City of God system of Augustine. Now, you see, the whole point of this doctrine of discovery and making the world the dominion of the Roman Catholic Church is really culminated in the idea of Plato's idea of Platonia, or the city of God that Augustine had talked about, and that America is to be the place that is the catalyst for that idea. So how is it that this phenomenon of American charismatic Protestantism, in which it says in Revelation chapter 13 that fire will come down from heaven in the sight of men? What is that talking about? Well, it's obviously accessing the imagery of Elijah and the prophets of Baal, and when God accepts an offering, fire comes down from heaven. And so Pentecostalism is based upon the idea on the day of Pentecost that God accepted the offering of Jesus Christ as the high priest, and fire came from heaven as a picture of accepting that offering. So in the charismatic or in the Pentecostal mind, when you're given the gift of tongues the way that they look at it, which is strange enough, it's where the oracles would speak in this unintelligible, mystical language, that they are accepted of God. And it's a sign that they have a special, unique acceptance of God, and that's a demonstration of that. Well, American Protestantism plays into the American political system, plays into the sense of the American identity, and that's where you get the phenomenon of American Protestantism of prosperity from.
I've heard people say, it's not about money, it's about peace, and it's about joy, and it's about love. It's about money. Money! To recognize what this Bible is saying. God is trying to put glorious material wealth and blessings into our hands.
Plays into the sense of the American identity, and that's where you get the phenomenon of American Protestantism of prosperity from, because we are to prosper here on this earth. We have been given the dominion. They have adopted the dominion theology of Roman Catholicism and believe that we should receive all of the wealth of this world. What is here in this world? So therefore, that's where you are getting this prosperity theology from. It is unique to America because of the identity that America has as this very unique new world order that is to basically be a model for the rest of the world. How can people from all different cultures and all different, economic backgrounds and all different ideas and thoughts and philosophies all be brought together and melded into a system that works? And they see these United States as a picture of the ideology for that. And it was built upon, if you read Samuel Zane Batten's work on the New World Order back after World War I, and the whole picture of bringing the world together after a great world war that's to bring peace, right? The war to end all wars. And so they have the whole League of Nations that turned into the United Nations. Well, this is all an American concept, and we want to basically import that concept to the rest of the world. So what do you have? You have the United States to this day going out throughout this entire world to be an upheaving nation like this Re'em. And it is breaking up the ground of all of these countries, and whatever influence it might have of displacing kings, displacing presidents, putting in a new regime. And the idea of that is to create the chaos, and from that chaos, in other words, you create the problem, and then you create the reaction, and then you come in with the democracy solution. And it is this picture of Christian democratic dominion theology.
The Hegelian dialectic is a threefold process of problem, reaction, solution that governments often use to create a collective consensus. Hegelian dialectics is used to describe the linear evolution of ideas, a new consciousness that emerges as a result of contradictory ideas participating in the problem-reaction-solution cycle. An example of the Hegelian dialectic would be how the Nazis faked attacks on their own people and resources and blamed it on the Poles, whereby the emotions of the German citizens were aroused and the Nazis were able to justify an attack on Poland. On a more grand scale, the Hegelian dialectic has been used to describe how governments and institutions create problems in order to gain a reaction, whereby they can implement their predetermined solutions that would otherwise have been opposed by the people. The American government today continues to use the Hegelian dialectic to arouse the emotions of citizens and effectively corral them into a predetermined agenda, such as war.